All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session on the digital thread enabler of automated requirement quality assessment. So my name is Henrik Mattfolk. I'm a principal systems engineer at Whirlpool and a CSEP since 2018. My background is mainly on controls design. I worked about 15 years designing microwave control systems. But over the last 5 years, I've been working more at product level, and I'm in a team that is basically setting processes for systems engineering, educating the organization on systems engineering. So the presentation I'm going to give to you today is basically a little bit our story. And I would say our story on requirement quality as it kind of evolved over, I would say that we started seriously to work with this 2017, and it has evolved since then. Usually when we talk about the digital thread, the first value that comes to mind is impact analysis. That's kind of the standard answer. But in my opinion, there is so many questions that can be answered with the digital thread, and it can really bring a lot of value. So what I'm going to talk about today is how the digital thread can really enhance the capability of requirement quality analysis and even to make it automated. So what you're going to see here, I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to start with kind of a more narrow context of requirement quality analysis, and we're going to work our way kind of out to a broader context and see a little bit what kind of impact that can have on the actually quality of the quality assessment. So the question here is, can you assess requirement quality correctly without an integrated data set? We see several tool makers creating tools for requirement quality. They are using pretty advanced technology, sometimes AI technology and natural language process technology. And they can produce requirement quality metrics to some extent today. To examine requirement quality a little bit further and dive a little bit deeper into that topic, we really need to be clear on the definition of requirement quality. And the definition of requirement quality that we use within Whirlpool is the following, and it's probably pretty standard. So a requirement is of good quality when it complies to the 9 characteristics defined by the INCOSE requirement writing guide. So these are characteristics for individual requirements. There are also characteristics for requirement sets, and I will touch on those later in this presentation. So terms that are really related to requirement quality is requirement verification and validation, or verified and validated requirements. Also terms like correct and complete comes to mind. And I can really recommend this paper by Dr. Carson. I think it's a good kind of primer to the topic. And I participated a little bit on the work with the guides and the manual as well, and at least I have some inspiration from this paper. I think If we look at it just a little bit simplified and more practically, so what is it we're trying to do here? And I think there is really two important things or two important aspects. The first one is the requirement understandable? Is it understandable as written? Is it understood as the person writing the requirement kind of intended it to be understood? So that is about the requirement itself and how it's written. But then the second super important aspect is it right? I mean, is that the right thing to ask for? So two completely different things, and it kind of relates back to correct and complete and verified and validated. So why put in the effort? What kind of benefit can we get from creating a requirement quality analysis or analyzing the quality of requirements? There are several studies out there that attribute project overruns, both from schedule, cost, but even creating the wrong system to issues with requirements. And since requirements should really be created early in the system lifecycle, we actually have a good opportunity here if we spot these issues at the right time in the life cycle. We can really get a heads up. We can basically know that, hey, if we continue this journey or drive down this road, it's going to be pretty bumpy. So then we have a good opportunity there to actually try to smooth the road there before we get too far. So having a good requirement quality metric can, and especially if you have it kind of broken down into maybe a set of metrics, can also then really inform you where to work. Okay, one thing is to know that you have issues, but okay, how do we fix them? And then we can really put our effort into where it makes most sense, or we get most bang for the buck, so to speak. It could be that we have no verification methods actually for our requirements, or seems like we don't even know if they trace to stakeholder needs. So are they really needed, and so on. So this is a really good opportunity we have actually to spot these issues early and put in the right kind of mitigation actions. So I don't need to tell you that requirements are important, but I think this illustration does a good job of kind of underlining the importance. I mean, here we see the artifacts, the kind of core artifacts throughout the life cycle of the system, starting with the stakeholder needs, their expectations, life cycle concepts, different usage scenarios, and we need to correctly transform them into a set of requirements that meet those needs. And every transformation step here, from needs to requirements, or from requirements to design, and at the end the final system, they need to be correct. Otherwise, we are obviously risking to develop the wrong system. And we can, in this illustration that is a little bit simplified, maybe to those that Lou showed earlier today, we can at least see the verification and validation loops here, or the requirement verification and validation loop. So we can assess requirements towards writing guides to make sure that they are kind of well written. We can validate them back to stakeholder needs, usage scenarios, to make sure that it is the right thing to do. Requirements can also be challenging, and requirements may, to many people, not be the most exciting word they heard. that day, and I'm sure you could may have heard things like, yeah, do you want requirements or a system? Well, we should have both, but I think we can also be a little bit smart about it, and sometimes it can help actually to not overuse that term and focus more on actually what requirements really communicate, and what we're really trying to figure out when we work with the kind of elicitation of requirements is important things like which functions that are needed from the system and when they are needed, how well they need to work, and under what conditions, what are the key interfaces that are really important, and what are key constraints that's going to limit our solution space. And then we have all the entities, and everyone want to know those things, and it's really important input to the design process or designing the system, making sure that we come up with the right design. And these things are of course derived off of knowing what the stakeholders need, what they expect, what are the different usage scenarios, all there to really trying to secure that we are really developing the right system. Okay, so then we have the characteristics of a requirement of good quality. So these are the 9 characteristics in the requirement writing guide. So first of all, it needs to be necessary. Someone needs to want it, and we need to understand also when and where it's needed. It needs to be appropriate to talk about what, not how, and it should be at the right level. It should be conform to some kind of boilerplate, or at least some kind of standardized statement composition. Need to be unambiguous. There should be ideally one and only one interpretation. It needs to be complete. And the way I like to think about that is those kind of 4 key components: what, who, what, how well, and under what conditions. If you cover those, you're probably going to be pretty good. It needs to be singular in the sense that we should only talk about one what in the requirement. Feasible, achievable. Here we have a kind of a little bit of famous tug of war between stakeholders asking for more, while we have the development kind of organization or developing organization that need to make sure that we're not taking on too much risk and we still fit the project scope in terms of cost, schedule, and it needs to be correct. So correct translation that will actually sufficiently meet the needs of the stakeholders. And of course verifiable. And I think verifiable it's not just important that it's kind of quantified. It need to ask, or we need actually to be able to find a verification method that we can actually execute, so we're not kind of creating something that will ask for the impossible. So a little bit kind of our journey here. We went through, I would say, 3 generations, actually 4 generations, where the first generation of requirement analysis that we used was basically no requirement analysis. And we quickly saw that, okay, this is not going in a good direction. We saw really kind of bad quality. We had maybe design specs coming into the requirement sets. You could have regulatory sections that were copy pasted in, and inconsistent subject of the requirements, and all sorts of issues. So we realized that, yeah, we're gonna have to do something here. So we started with an approach where we could analyze requirements taken separately, and that helped a little bit. I wouldn't say that it got exactly to where we wanted. So after a while, we enhanced it with analyzing requirements also in the context of the requirement set, so we could look at more kind of consistency within the set. And right now we're at this kind of third level of analyzing requirements in context of the digital thread. Is that going to solve every problem? No, but at least it's much better than where we were a few years ago. So that's a little bit kind of the different maturation level we went through over the last few years. I will talk about each separately. I will actually start with analyzing requirements in isolation, and then I'm going to jump actually up to talking about analyzing requirements in context of the digital thread, and then I will end with talking about it in context of requirement sets. So let's look at the function of analyzing a requirement in isolation. We need a set of inputs, of course, and probably the minimum you need is, for example, the INCOSE rules. You need the requirement text, of course. If you're a little bit more sophisticated, you can manage also boilerplates. So if we know which requirement kind we are analyzing, we can do this a little bit better. And out from this function, you get some kind of understanding of compliance to different characteristics. So let's look at an example here. So I hope this is a well-written requirement. So it's a system requirement for a coffee maker function to brew coffee, a pot of coffee within some amount of time and under certain conditions as well. So let's see, let's pretend now that the only thing we know is what's written within this box, plus the inputs that we provided to the analysis, like the writing rules and maybe the boilerplates. Can we know if this requirement is necessary? I would argue no. I mean, it sounds necessary, but can a machine know that? Probably not. Is it appropriate? Is it written at the right level? Kind of looks like that, but is there a way to know, for example, the brew coffee function? Is that a good system level function? Yeah, maybe we don't know that. What about conforming? Is it conforming to our standard way of writing? Yeah, if we know the boilerplates, I think we can hit that one. So conforming should be okay. What about unambiguous? Can we determine that? Yeah, with the rules, we should be able to determine that characteristic as well. What about complete? Something missing here? What, how well, under what conditions? Who? What? How well and what conditions? I think we can do that too by trying to find those kind of components. Is it singular? Yeah, that should be possible to figure out too. What about feasible? Is this too challenging for the project, or can we take this on? Probably not. That's going to be difficult to know. What about correct? Is it at the right level? Yeah, depends probably on, I mean, based on the subject, it sounds like it, right? But then we need to know what the name of the system is and so on. So I would argue no. Is it verifiable? Okay, it's probably we can probably know that it's quantified, but the question is still, can someone find a verification method that we can actually execute on this one? That's still going to be difficult to know. So we can probably hit around 50% of the characteristics, or in this case, 4 out of 5 should definitely be doable. So let's look at an example where we have a requirement that doesn't look as good or is, I mean, this is a correct requirement, but a requirement of good quality. But let's take this one. So it's basically the same requirement, but here we're asking to brew coffee in kind of ludicrous speed of 1 second. So if we run this through the quality analysis, we probably get a thumbs up on the characteristics that we can assess. It's still complete, singular, conforming, and ambiguous. But what about feasible? I haven't seen a coffee maker who can brew coffee in 1 second, so unless it's instant coffee. So we would definitely fail that characteristic. And it's not correct either. I don't imagine that this could link to a usage scenario where 1 second would make sense. So in this case, we would get good requirement quality, but obviously it's not really a good requirement or requirement of good quality. Another example, so in this case, it's a requirement that is located in the system requirement set for the coffee maker, but it says something like the heater shall maintain temperature. Okay, if we run this through the quality checker, we probably still get a pass on the complete, singular, conforming, and unambiguous. But there is something fishy here. So the heater shall maintain temperature. Okay, if I grab the heater, hold that in your hand, and watch that maintain temperature of coffee, it simply won't do it. So there's something wrong here. Maybe the first intuition is that, oh, it should be in the heater requirement set. But it would probably not be appropriate there either, because you can't really verify that function at that level. So I think the conclusion here is that, yeah, it's at the right level, but there's still something wrong. It's the wrong subject to this requirement, so it's not correctly written. So at least it would be nice if we could get that out from the quality analysis on this requirement, that the subject is not consistent with the level that is written at. Okay, so now we're changing gears. So now we're going to talk about requirement quality using the digital thread. So now we're getting up to that kind of highest level capability. So the first thing we need to do here is to define a system meta model. And that's probably also where we start to first get into trouble. There is, at least if you're a tool vendor, as far as I know, there is no kind of globally aligned meta model for a system. So probably each company, they have their own kind of permutation of their system meta model. What you're looking at here is an example which is probably pretty close to what most are using. We have the requirement connecting to needs, maybe to lifecycle concepts and the usage scenarios, connect to verification methods, and on the architecture model side, on the right-hand side here, we see connections to functions, if it's a functional requirement, and also form elements. So we need this meta model kind of defined in order to start to use these trace links to our kind of benefit in the analysis. I'll introduce two additional artifacts here that you see that are called agreed to record. We agree on requirements. That can be an attribute of the requirement itself, or it can also be a separate record. And another record that is a requirement validation record. So when we perform validation, if we have a record of that, we can link the requirement to that. So with help of these additional artifacts that exist around the requirement, in most cases probably produced by humans, so that kind of human assessment goes into this. So it's not really automated in that sense. It still involves humans, but we can at least look for evidence on what humans did. So now let's take these. If you remember from the first analysis, requirements taken separately, there were 5 characteristics that we were not able to hit there. Let's see what we can do here when we have traceability to other artifacts. So what about feasible? There's something here that can help us to determine if it's feasible. Yeah, we have an agreement record, for example. I would assume that we're not going to have a set of humans agreeing to this requirement unless they think it's feasible. So at least we can probably at least address that characteristic with looking at some kind of agreement record. What about necessary? Yeah, we can look for upcoming links to needs and lifecycle concepts. Are we at least able to indicate someone who wants this requirement? Then at least a good chance that it's a little bit necessary at least. What about verifiable? Yeah, connection to a system verification method will actually give us some indication that not only someone can read it and understand it and develop a verification method, but it seems to be feasible as well to execute it. What about correct? Is it a correct translation of needs and expectation from stakeholders? Yeah, at least if you have a validation record or some kind of attribute of being validated, we can use that to at least get some indication whether that happened or not. Probably performed by humans, but maybe you can model these things as well and simulate them. What about appropriate? Is it written at the right level, for example, which is one aspect of appropriate? Yeah, we can look at, for example, we know if this requirement is connected to the system or located in a system requirement set as well. And we can look for consistency between the name of the form element and the subject of the requirement. If it's a requirement that is connected to a function, we can look at the allocation to form to see if that level seems to be appropriate, considered also the subject of the requirement. So at least we can get some help with establishing the appropriate characteristic as well. So are these things perfect? It will work perfectly? Yeah, maybe not, but at least we can get some level of confidence on these characteristics by using these trace links to other artifacts. So now let's look at this kind of bad example where we had a requirement that was asking for basically too fast brewing time of a coffee pot. Now, if we have a quality model that uses the digital thread and the connection to other artifacts, would we be able to flag this requirement with that additional capability? So would we fail necessary? Probably not. We probably have a link to a need. So that would probably still be okay. Probably still verifiable. Well, if you ask the VMV person to do this, they would probably wonder what you're doing, but it's probably still appropriate as well at the right level, so on. But what about feasible? I can't imagine that we would create an agreement record for this requirement, so that characteristic would definitely be flagged. And I hope that we wouldn't be able to create a validation record either for that requirement. So that characteristic would be flagged as well. So I think we at least have a better opportunity here to capture some of these kind of issues that can at least be assessed by humans, and we produce some kind of output from that assessment. So lastly, just quick on requirement sets. So if you analyze requirements in context of the set, and there we have another set of characteristics that we like to distinguish. We like to know if the set is complete, no missing requirements. Is it consistent across the set? For example, the same subject it's a good thing to start with to look at. Is it feasible? Not just each individual requirement, but the whole set. Can you come up with one solution that satisfies the entire set of requirements? Comprehensible, can you even understand what it communicates, and able to be validated? So again here, so the requirement set in the digital thread is kind of simple. I mean, we have the requirements connecting to the set, and the set itself often connects with form, system requirement sets with the logical object representing the system in the architecture model and so on. We can have connections, of course, between requirements and directly to the model, and it's a little bit kind of a redundant thing. Even if it's functional requirements to connect directly to the functions, we'll add some information there. So now, if we have this kind of digital thread, or we at least know which requirements are part of the set, which characteristics can we add or address here? I'm adding another artifact here, and that is some kind of agreement record related to the requirement set. So consistent, yeah, we know which requirements that are part of the set, so we can do some kind of consistency analysis. So that should be okay. What about feasible and comprehensible? Yeah, maybe if we're able to agree to this set, at least a set of humans look at it, it will tell you something about feasibility probably, and also if it's possible to understand it. What about complete? Complete is, I think, probably one of the most trickiest kind of characteristics to address. I mean, when you look at a total set of requirements, maybe it addresses a little bit completeness as well. If we're lucky, we will spot that, hey, there's something missing here. We have no reliability requirements or something like that. But I think it's a weak connection there. So just performing a requirement quality analysis, kind of enhancing the analysis taken separately with adding requirement set as well. What you need to add to your kind of textual analysis is, okay, we need the requirement set as an input, but then you need to add some function for consistency analysis, and then you can also maybe spot issues with individual requirements, and you can also have some kind of assessment of the set itself. So just quick on the completeness characteristic here. So most of the assessment, I would say all of the assessments that we talked about up till now, basically started from the requirement, and we looked kind of out to see what's actually connected to the requirement. For if you're going after completeness, you have to kind of look at it from the other direction, basically move up one step in the life cycle upstream, and for example, look at your total set of stakeholder needs and requirements and life cycle concepts. What are the different usage scenarios? So let's say that you have a set of 500 needs, but you have 300 of them traceable to requirements, but 200 are not. So that is a little bit suspicious, right? So, and you won't really spot that if you look at it just from the requirement side. So I think this is not going to be perfect either, but I think you will at least be able to address this better if you change perspective and come at it from artifacts that are produced earlier in the life cycle. So if we do that, what would that analysis look like? Yeah, if we have the requirement here in the center, and we have things like needs, lifecycle concepts, we can look at if we're kind of addressing all those, even in the architecture model, probably. You can look at, do we have functions without connection to requirements and stuff like that? But you need to look at it from the architecture model side, then you can't look at it from the requirement side, unless they kind of live in the same tool. Okay, so I think we're doing some of this today. We try to address this, but I would say that we are still pretty immature on this characteristic. So just to kind of wrap it up here, the functions that you need in order to analyze requirements in a digital thread. Yeah, let's look at the inputs here. So we still have our boilerplates, we have the rules, we have the integrated data set, and that need to be produced according to some kind of system meta model that is kind of handshaked up front. So beside the textual analysis, you need some kind of traceability analysis, and then you need to weigh that together in some kind of roll-up model, and then show the result on the dashboard. And the advantage here is that these functions, even if the artifacts that we are analyzing to a great extent are produced by humans, these functions doesn't really need to be performed by humans. So that can be, those can be performed by a computer. So what's the advantage with automating that? Yeah, for example, having a human making this quality assessment, that can be pretty costly and probably take a long time before you get a fresh update. So with this approach, you can definitely have frequent refresh of your requirement quality analysis, maybe on a daily basis. To create a new assessment probably doesn't come with a lot of cost. Of course, there is a significant cost of investing in this capability, but then you can produce each refresh to a low cost. And it will definitely enhance the accuracy as well of the metric that you're getting out. If the metric says that it's of good quality, it's probably not that bad. Okay, so to wrap this up, we looked at 3 different approaches here to assess requirement quality: requirements in isolation to the left, requirements in context to requirement sets in the middle, and then in context to the digital thread. And we can see that at least we have an opportunity to address more and more characteristics of requirements and requirement sets. So the message here is basically that use the digital thread to increase the number of characteristics that you can assess your requirements to, and that will basically help you in getting a better and more accurate answer to, in my opinion, the ultimate question here of, do we have a complete set of correct requirements? I think that's it.
Henrik, I really like your presentation. It really brings out some really important points. One thing I want to point out is that when all we had was the guide for writing requirements, you mentioned the characteristics, and each of the characteristics in the guide is mapped to a set of rules. And there's like 44 certain rules in the guide. And so there's a lot of automation activities going on for natural language processing to go look at just the text of a requirement and compare it against the rules and assign a quality factor based on those rules. And I've had a lot of people come to me and say, we've got lousy requirements. Could we have a course on how to write requirements? And that's really what you'd be doing, is saying, how well do those adhere to the rules for writing good requirements? But in developing the manual, I found that I think that from a quality standpoint, following the rules is maybe 20, 30% of quality. And it's really the analysis, the engineering thought process that goes into the activities that we perform that really contribute to having those characteristics. And so in the manual, there's a mapping of a lot of the sections that say we're doing this particular activity to help establish this characteristic. And you'll see when you go through the manual, especially, well, a lot in the needs part of it is you go and see I have a section on a certain topic, and I either begin it or end it with this maps to this characteristic. And then when you look at the sections for needs verification validation and requirements verification validation, every activity is linked to one of those characteristics. We're doing this activity because it helps establish that characteristic. And you'll see that from a verification standpoint, in both cases, your traceability that you're talking about, that digital thread, is really kind of fundamental to being able to do a lot of that assessment. Because now I'm not taking the requirements in isolation like you showed, but I'm taking requirements in the context of the whole system engineering effort. And that's what you really need for consistency, completeness, correctness. And then the feasibility thing is really important. And one of the big points we make is that the quality of your requirements, because they're transformed from the needs, is totally dependent upon the quality of the set of needs and the life cycle concept work that you did up front. So you really made some super good points in your presentation.
Thank you, Lou. I don't know, I haven't been watching the chat if there are some questions there.
Yeah, you actually didn't have a lot of questions. There were a lot of people commenting and concurring and giving you agreement. But if anyone wants to chime in now, we got a few more minutes before we go to Tony's presentation. Happy to take one or two more questions.
Yeah, Tammy, Raymond Wolfgang here, if I can add one.
Of course.
Henrik, I love the approach of completeness. One of the things we struggle with is sometimes we have too many and there's some redundancy. Have you explored this technique to, if we go to that third level of, doing requirements against the digital, in the digital thread, to actually get a requirements reduction or a minimal set? Have you played with that idea?
Yeah, so that is actually, that's a good point. So a little bit that kind of gold plating, and that is a real problem. It's definitely a real problem, and I wouldn't say that what I presented here really addressed that very well. But I would say though that if you have a good practice of connecting your requirements with your elements in the system architecture model, I think you will spot those things a little bit earlier and it will help you. But one really tricky area is the regulatory. There's a lot of constraints coming in there. So it's difficult to kind of mitigate that. But one thing that we've been very careful with is to not push for the organization to create requirements. Well, we want them to create requirements, but we don't want them to create too many. So unfortunately, I don't think I have a super good answer to that, but it helps to have a quality checker, because it's easy to, and that was kind of a little bit how it started. It's so easy to dump a lot of things into the set, but if they also need to be of good quality, they will be checked. And if you're not creating good quality things, you will get a homework. So now go and correct this, and it's like, oh, maybe it was not a good idea to dump 500 things in there because they were not good quality, and it's going to take me 5 weeks to fix that. Okay, let's think about that again. So I think just having this practice of a good quality checker mitigates at least some of the copy paste things that can generate a lot of garbage, to be honest.
But Henrik, really, the model you showed really helps, because when you're looking at the requirements and you have all that, you have too many requirements or people just thrown in, they're really not doing that assessment. They're really on the left where you were talking about. They're looking at everything in isolation. But when you look at the characteristic necessary, one way to determine necessary, does it trace to a parent, a source, a need? So if you don't have that traceability, then why is it there? Another thing is one of the attributes that we describe as rationale. If people really can't justify the existence of that requirement, then why is it in the set? And then the other thing you had in there is the architecture link. So you were talking about appropriate to level. A lot of reasons why we end up with bloated sets of requirements is because not all the requirements are appropriate to level, not only on level of architecture, but also we have the problem of, is it really a design output or a design input? And we end up bloating things by putting a lot of implementation design output information into our design input set on that. So, your thing about matching it to the characteristics should help reduce the number of requirements in a set. And the manual discusses that extensively for both needs and requirements.
And one thing I've seen, actually, I think that was Jeremy Dick in his requirements engineering book. He talks about a healthy fan out. That is something we don't check that, but let's say that you have one need that fans out to all the requirements in your set. It will technically still be kind of necessary. You have a link to a need, but someone created a really unhealthy fan out, which is probably not correct. So that would be one way to spot. One additional thing you could do to kind of try to catch those things. If someone tried to add 300 requirements and they trace to one need, that's probably not healthy.
If you look at a lot of the work that, I don't know, is Ron Carson still on? But, he makes a big deal in a lot of his papers about using the term necessary and sufficient. So if you can't show it's necessary, why is it there? But then from an incompleteness standpoint, the set you have isn't sufficient. And so if I have a set that's 300, I think I've went way beyond what's necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we want to start wrapping it up because I know I've got one more speaker. Any last comments before we switch off the recording? Okay, give me 1 second.